My son laughed in my face. "Your grandkids don't even remember you, Mom." I stayed silent and opened my drawer. I pulled out a stack of letters and photos they'd been sending me in secret. His face went white when he saw the dates and what they wrote about him. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. He stood in my kitchen, holding the photograph between his thumb and forefinger, as if it were a specimen. The steam from the kettle curled between us, a fragile, dissolving screen. "Why do you even keep this, Mom?" Marcus asked, his voice a blend of amusement and something harder. "It's from 2 years ago. They look completely different now." I placed his mug of tea on the placemat, aligning the handle just so. The photograph was a standard school portrait, the kind with a blue gradient background. Zoe had been 12, her smile cautious, and Kai 9, with a front tooth missing. A good picture. I kept it in the drawer with the bills and takeout menus because I liked to see it when I reached for a pen. "I keep it because they're my grandchildren," I said, my voice level. "It's a recent picture to me." He laughed, a short, dry sound. He set the photo flat on the table and tapped it with a manicured fingernail. "That's the thing. It's not recent. They've grown. Zoe's almost as tall as Sandra now. Kai's voice is changing. You wouldn't know." I sat down across from him. The woven texture of the placemat was a grid of intersecting lines. I focused on that pattern, the way the strands passed over and under. "You don't bring them by. My calls go to voicemail. How would I know?" He leaned back in the chair, dismissing the question with a wave. His suit jacket was expensive, charcoal gray. It looked stiff in my warm kitchen. "They're busy, Mom. We're all busy. Soccer, coding camp, tutoring. It's a different world. And honestly, it's better this way. Less confusion for them." Confusion. I repeated the word, letting it sit in the air between us. The kettle began its low, whistling build. Yes, confusion. He picked up his tea but did not drink. "You have your life here, with your routines. It's quiet, kids are loud, they're messy. They ask a million questions. I remember how you were after Dad died. You needed peace. I'm just protecting that. And them. Keeping things simple." I thought of the silence in my house. I had never called it peace to him. I called it absence. You decide what is simple for me. Someone has to be practical. He took a sip, then made a slight face. It was too hot or not sweetened enough. He always preferred coffee. "Look, I'm just being realistic. You see them once a year, maybe, at a holiday dinner for an hour. They're practically strangers. They don't know your stories. They don't know your habits. To them, you're just Grandma Ellie, a nice lady in some old photos." The whistle of the kettle reached its peak. I stood, turned off the stove, and poured the water into my own mug. The ritual of it, the tea bag, the steam, the slow descent of color, gave my hands a purpose. "They used to know me," I said to the counter. "They used to come every Sunday." "That was before," he said, and his tone lost its false patience. "Before they had real lives, before they had friends and activities that matter. It's not a slight against you, Mom. It's just progress." I carried my mug back to the table and sat. I looked at him, my only child. I saw the man he had become, shaped by a desire for a sleek, uncluttered existence. I saw the little boy who used to cling to my leg in the supermarket. The two images would not reconcile. "So," I began, my voice carefully neutral, "what are you saying, Marcus? That we should make it official? That I should stop considering them my grandchildren?" He had the decency to look briefly uncomfortable. He adjusted his cufflink. "I'm saying you should adjust your expectations, live your life, enjoy your retirement. Don't hang on to relics." He gestured again to the photograph. "It just sets you up for disappointment. Trust me, they're fine. They're happy. They don't really think about it." The air in the kitchen grew still. The scent of bergamot from my tea was sharp and clear. "Do they ask about me?" I asked. He shifted in his seat. "A minute tell. Sometimes kids ask things. I tell them you're tired or that you're not feeling up for visitors. It's not a lie. You always say you're tired." I had said I was tired the last time he called, a Tuesday evening 3 months ago. He had asked, with palpable reluctance, if he could drop them off for 2 hours while he and Sandra attended a real estate closing. I had said I had a headache coming on. I had lied. I had wanted a real invitation, not a logistical necessity. "And they accept that?" I pressed. "A child accepts that a grandparent is permanently tired? They're not little kids anymore, Mom. Zoe's 14. She gets it. And Kai. He's into his games and his friends. They don't dwell." He finished his tea in a final gulp and stood, the chair legs scraping against the floor. The visit was over. The performance of checking in was complete. "Face it," he said, and now the cruelty was naked, polished to a hard, casual shine. "Your grandkids don't even remember you. Not really. They might remember a house or some cookies. But you, as a person, you're a faded photo in a drawer." He picked up his keys from the counter. He did not look at me when he said, "It's better to accept it. Saves everyone the awkwardness." I did not stand. I kept my hands wrapped around the warmth of my mug. I looked at the photograph he had left on the table. "Thank you for the visit, Marcus. Drive safely." He paused at the kitchen doorway, perhaps waiting for an argument, for tears, for the emotional scene he could then dismiss as proof of my fragility. He found only silence. "I'll call you," he said, the empty phrase hanging in the air. I listened to the solid sound of the front door closing. I listened to the engine of his car start, the crunch of gravel as he backed out, the fade of the sound down the street. The house returned to its familiar quiet. I sat there for a long time. The tea grew cold. My eyes stayed on the photograph. I did not cry. Crying was for a loss, and I had not lost anything he described. He had tried to take it, but he had not succeeded. He only thought he had. Finally, I stood. I cleared the mugs, washed them, dried them, put them away. I wiped the table. I picked up the school portrait. I studied their faces, not as they were now, but as they were then. I saw Zoe's intelligence in her eyes, the same look her father had at that age. I saw Kai's gentle openness. I did not see strangers. I walked to my bedroom. The late afternoon sun cut a warm rectangle across the worn rug. I went to the large old dresser that had been my mother's. The wood was dark and solid. I opened the top drawer. It was not a drawer for clothes. It held a cedar box, a small album, and a stack of envelopes tied with a velvet ribbon. I did not take them out. I simply rested my hand on the ribbon, feeling the soft pile of the fabric. The scent of cedar and old paper rose to meet me. It was the smell of history, of continuity. It was the smell of truth, patiently waiting. Downstairs, the house was silent. The photograph of the children was back in its drawer with the bills. Everything was in its place. Everything was calm. I closed the dresser drawer with a soft, final click. The mechanism of his humiliation was now in motion. He just didn't know it yet. My hand remained on the velvet ribbon for a long moment. The scent of cedar was a solid presence in the room. Then I closed the drawer. The action was deliberate. The time for that particular comfort would come later, but it was not now. Now was for the maintenance of order. I went to the living room. The evening light was fading, casting long shadows across the furniture. I picked up the watering can from its spot by the hallway and began my rounds. The spider plant on the bookshelf, the peace lily by the window, the small pot of herbs on the kitchen sill. Each received a measured amount. I checked the leaves for dust, trimmed a brown edge from a fern. This routine had a rhythm. It required attention, but not thought. It was a way to let the sharp edges of his words soften into something manageable, something that could be analyzed later, like data. After the plants, I stood before the wall of photographs. There were many. My wedding portrait, a young man with a bright smile and a sharp suit beside me. Marcus as a baby, as a gap-toothed second grader, as a scowling teenager in a cap and gown. My late husband Samuel in his post office uniform. And there, At the end, a framed picture of Zoe and Kai, maybe 5 and 2, sitting on my lap on this very living room sofa. We were all laughing. Samuel had taken that one. I did not dwell on that photo. Instead, I looked at the one of Samuel. It was a candid shot I'd taken in the backyard. He was turned halfway toward the camera, a trowel in his hand, his face caught in a moment of quiet satisfaction. He'd always known how to handle Marcus's stubborn pride. He would listen, let the storm blow itself out, and then speak a few firm words that carried the weight of the world. I had never mastered that particular method. My strength was of a different kind. It was the strength of the deep root, unmoving and patient. "He said they don't remember me," I said aloud to the photograph. My voice was calm in the quiet room. It was a statement of fact, not a plea for sympathy. Samuel's smile in the picture did not change, but in my mind, I heard his response. It was not words, but a feeling, a certainty. "He's wrong, Ellie. You know he is." I did know. The knowledge was not a hope. It was evidence, stored in the cedar-scented dark of the drawer. I moved to the bookshelf, not to read, but to straighten. My fingers trailed over the spines of old encyclopedias, photo albums, the collected works of Langston Hughes, a thick guide to birds of the mid-Atlantic. My life was here, in these objects, a retired librarian's life, ordered and cataloged. Marcus saw it as clutter, the detritus of a concluded life. He did not understand that it was an active archive. My fingers stopped on a small cloth-bound book. It was not a published work. I slid it out. The cover was plain blue. I opened it. Inside, in a child's careful, looping script, were the words, "For Grandma, my storybook." It was from Zoe. She must have been 6. The pages were filled with crayon drawings and phonetically spelled narratives about cats and rainbows. I turned to the last page. There was a drawing of 2 figures, one tall with a triangle skirt, one small with a stick figure hand in the taller one's hand. Underneath, she had written, "Me and Grandma go to the library." A memory surfaced, not as a flood, but as a clear, distinct image. It was a Saturday morning. Zoe was perhaps 7, her hair a cloud of puffs and coils. She sat on a stool in this kitchen, her small back to me. "Grandma, can you do the braids with the beads, like last time?" "Of course, baby. Sit still." My hands, then perhaps a little quicker, a little smoother, parted her hair. The ritual was intimate and quiet. The scent of coconut oil, the soft snick of the hairband on my wrist, the concentration on her face, visible in the reflection of the toaster. "Does it hurt?" I asked. "No, it feels nice." "Mommy pulls." "You have to tell her if it hurts." "She says I'm too tender-headed." Zoe paused, watching my hands in the metal reflection. "Grandma, how did you learn to do hair?" My grandmother taught me, and she learned from her grandmother. It's a chain. I'm a link, and now I'm teaching you. You'll be the next link. She was silent for a while, thinking this over. What if I break the chain? You can't break it, Zoe. Even if you forget how, the link is still there. The knowledge is just waiting. I finished the braids, securing the ends with small blue beads. She turned and hugged me, the beads clicking softly against my cheek. That was a year before Samuel passed, 2 years before Marcus began the gradual process of withdrawal. I closed the storybook and returned it to its place on the shelf. The memory was a piece of the proof. It was not nostalgic. It was foundational. I went to the kitchen and prepared a simple dinner. A small piece of baked chicken, some greens, a slice of cornbread. I ate at the table, alone. The silence was a companion. I considered the mechanics of Marcus's deception, the casual excuses. She's tired, she's not feeling well. It's not a good time. He had constructed a narrative of my frailty and disinterest. He had sold this story to his children and perhaps even to himself. It was cleaner for him that way. A mother who was a quiet, fading icon was easier to manage than a mother who was present, who asked questions, who remembered everything. He'd forgotten what I was. A librarian does not simply store information. She curates it. She preserves it. She knows exactly where to find the needed volume when the time comes. After washing my plate, I returned to the bedroom. This time, I did not hesitate. I opened the drawer. I lifted out the cedar box. It was not heavy, but its weight was significant. I carried it to the bed and sat beside it. I did not open the lid. Not yet. My plan was not formed, but it was beginning to gather itself. The confrontation in the kitchen had been the spark. His arrogant certainty was the fuel. My evidence was the tool. I needed to understand the shape of what I would do. Revenge, for me, was not about shouting or causing a scene. It was about correction. It was about restoring an accurate record. I placed my palm flat on the cool, smooth wood of the box. Inside were the letters, the recent photographs, the artifacts of a relationship he believed he had successfully erased. They were my catalog of his falsehood. I knew every item. I knew the date on every envelope, the slant of every sentence, the subject of every snapshot. Tomorrow, I would begin. Tomorrow, I would open the box and review the evidence, not for comfort, but for strategy. For now, I returned it to the drawer. The house was dark. I went through the motions of bedtime, washing my face, brushing my hair, changing into my nightclothes. I lay in bed, watching the pattern of streetlight shadows on the ceiling. The anger was there, a low, constant heat in my chest, but it was contained. It was being converted, transformed into a cold, clear purpose. He thought he had relegated me to the past. He would learn that I was very much a present force, and my proof was sleeping in his own house, in the form of 2 children who, despite his best efforts, had never stopped remembering. The morning after Marcus's visit, I woke at my usual time. The plan had solidified in the quiet hours of the night. It was not complex. It was simply the execution of a truth. The first step was to review the archive. I dressed, made breakfast, and completed my morning chores. Only then, with the sunlight strong on the dining table, did I bring the cedar box from the drawer. I placed it on the table. The wood was warm from the sun. I lifted the lid. The scent was stronger now, released into the room. Inside, the stack of envelopes was neat, bound with the velvet ribbon. On top were a few recent photographs. Beneath them, the chronology began. I did not go to the most recent letters. I went to the beginning. I untied the ribbon and found the oldest envelope, its corners softened from handling. It was a birthday card. The front was generic, a scene of flowers with the word mother in a flowing script. I opened it. Inside, in Marcus's efficient hand, it read, "Happy birthday. Hope you're well. Marcus, Sandra, Zoe, and Kai." The sentiment was perfunctory. The pen had barely touched the paper. It was mailed 3 years ago, a week before my 65th birthday. That card had arrived, and I had felt the hollow ache of it. It was an artifact of obligation. I had placed it on the mantel, and it had stayed there for a week, a small rectangular monument to my growing distance from my son's family. When I went to put it away, its weight felt wrong. It was too light. I opened it again. That was when I felt the slight ridge, the extra thickness in the fold. Tucked deep into the crease where the card was glued to the backing was a smaller folded piece of lined notebook paper. I remember my fingers, suddenly clumsy, working to extract it without tearing. I smoothed it open on my palm. It was a drawing, in pencil with careful, hesitant lines. It was my house. The square shape, the front door, the large oak tree to the side. In the window, she had drawn a stick figure with a triangle skirt. From the chimney, a curl of smoke, and at the bottom, in a child's printing that was trying to be cursive, it said, "I miss you. Love, Zoe." That was all. No explanation, no request, just a statement hidden inside the empty courtesy of her father's card. I sat down at this very table, the card and the hidden note before me. My initial feeling was not joy, it was alarm. Then, a slow, cold understanding. Zoe, who was 11 then, had engineered this. She had found a way. She had slipped this truth into the vehicle of her father's lie. She knew the card would reach me. She knew he would not check it. What to do? A direct response was impossible. A phone call would be intercepted. A card mailed to her would be seen. I needed a secure channel. I thought for 2 days. Then I went to the small stationery store downtown and bought a box of plain thank you notes and a book of stamps. I wrote my reply on a single card. I did not mention her father. I did not question the secrecy. I simply acknowledged her message. "Dear Zoe," I wrote, "thank you for the beautiful drawing of my house. You remembered the tree. I look at it every morning. I miss you too. I am always here. Love, Grandma." I addressed the envelope to her using her full name. I used my neatest handwriting. I reasoned that a letter addressed solely to her might pass through the household mail with less scrutiny. A card for the children was one thing. A personal letter to his daughter was another. I mailed it and waited. The reply came 3 weeks later. It arrived in a plain white envelope, again addressed only to Zoe. The return address was mine. Sandra must have brought it in from the mailbox and given it to her. Inside was another sheet of notebook paper. "Dear Grandma," it began. "I got your card. Dad didn't see it. I keep it in my drawer. Mom says you have arthritis. Is that why you don't visit? I'm doing a project on ancient Egypt. I have to make a sarcophagus out of a shoebox." Kai lost another tooth. He put it under his pillow, but Dad forgot to be the tooth fairy. Kai cried. "Don't tell anyone I told you. Love, Zoe." The letter was a revelation. It was not just a sentiment, it was intelligence. It contained 2 crucial pieces of information: the successful covert nature of our communication and a glimpse into the cracks in Marcus's carefully managed world. The forgotten tooth fairy was a small thing, but it spoke of distraction, of a focus on things other than the soft, small rituals of childhood. I wrote back. I offered advice on the sarcophagus, suggesting gold paint and markers for hieroglyphs. I expressed sympathy for Kai about the tooth. I did not address the question about arthritis. I simply wrote, "I am always here if you need to talk. You can write to me any time." That was the birth of the protocol. She would write, hiding her letters in outgoing mail, or later, as she grew bolder, mailing them herself from a post office box near her school. I would write back, always careful, always neutral, never criticizing her parents. My letters were a steady, safe shore. They contained small stories from my life, answers to her questions, quiet affirmations. They were, in essence, the conversations we would have had on Sunday afternoons. I held that first, folded drawing now. The paper was fragile. The pencil lines had smudged slightly. This was the origin point. Marcus, in his arrogance, had handed me the very instrument of his downfall. He had sent a hollow card, and his daughter had filled the void with a truth he could not control. His act of neglect had created the opportunity for our rebellion. I placed the drawing carefully on the table. I methodically went through the next several envelopes, establishing the pattern. Her letters came every few months, sometimes with a drawing from Kai tucked inside. Then, about 2 years ago, Kai's own first letter arrived, printed in large, careful block letters. "Dear Grandma, do you know what bird has a red chest? Dad says a robin. Is that true? Love, Kai." I had written back a full page on robins, their habits, their song. I included a photograph from my bird guide. He had written back to tell me he saw one in the yard and that his father had told him to come inside and stop staring out the window. Each letter was a thread. Marcus thought he had cut the cable. He did not realize his children were patiently, secretly, weaving a new one, stronger because it was hidden from his sight. I tied the ribbon around the early correspondence again. I had seen enough for now. The foundation was clear. The next step was to understand the full scope of the structure they had built, the content of their growing minds. That would require a longer, more analytical review. I returned the box to its drawer. The evidence was in order. The case was building itself. I spent the next several afternoons at my writing desk, the cedar box open beside me. The sunlight moved across the polished wood in a slow, predictable arc. This was not a task for haste. I worked chronologically, laying out the letters in order by postmark date. I read each one with the detached focus of an archivist, noting themes, changes in handwriting, and the gradual emergence of two distinct personalities pushing against the confines of their father's narrative. Kai's early letters were physical objects. They contained pressed leaves, a feather from what he insisted was a hawk, but was likely a pigeon, a sticker of a dinosaur. His printing was large, each letter carefully formed. April 12th, 2 years ago. Dear Grandma, I showed my teacher the picture of the robin you sent. She said I am a good researcher. Dad said not to bother you with too many questions. But is it okay if I ask one more? What do owls eat? We heard one at night. Love, Kai. My reply was factual. I described the diet of common barn owls. I included a photocopied diagram of an owl pellet. I did not address his comment about his father. The subtext was enough. His letters grew longer, more phonetic as he tried harder words. He wrote about school, about a friend who moved away, about winning a math competition. Then a shift. The tone became confused. November 3rd last year. Dear Grandma, I asked Dad last Sunday if we could visit you. He said it was too much. I asked too much for who? He said for everyone. He said you need your rest and we are loud. We are not loud. Zoe is quiet. I am quiet sometimes. Is it too much for you? If it is not too much for you, can you tell him? Love, Kai. I held that letter for a long time. The question was a trap. If I said it was not too much for me, I would be compelling him to contradict his father, a burden no child should carry. If I agreed with Marcus, I would betray the boy's trust and confirm the lie. I chose a third path. Dear Kai, I wrote, you are never too much. Sometimes adults make decisions for complicated reasons. It is not about you being loud. It is about schedules and other things. I would love to see you anytime. But do not argue with your father. It is not your job to fix this. Just keep being your curious self. And tell me, did you ever figure out what that owl was eating? I redirected. I validated his feelings without endorsing a rebellion I knew he could not win. It was the only safe way. His next letter did not mention the visit again. It was a detailed account of a science experiment with baking soda and vinegar. The relief in his words was palpable. He had been heard, and the burden had been lifted. Zoe's evolution was different. Her early hidden notes gave way to full letters on scented stationery, then to plain notebook paper filled with tighter, more confident script. She moved from reporting events to analyzing them. January 15th, last year. Grandma, I had my first poetry unit in English. I wrote one I think you might like. It's about the oak tree in your yard. I remember the roots above the ground. I compared them to veins. Is that okay? I don't want to show it here. Mom would say it's nice. Dad would ask why I'm writing about a tree I haven't seen in years. It's easier to just send it to you. The poem was attached. It was indeed about the oak tree. It was also clearly about resilience, about hidden strength. She saw the metaphor perfectly. I wrote back with a line-by-line appreciation, treating her as a fellow writer. I discussed word choice and rhythm. I did not mention her father's hypothetical reaction. I affirmed her talent. Her later letters became a confidential log of adolescence. She wrote about friend drama, about the pressure of grades, about the discomfort of her changing body. She wrote about her mother's preoccupation with work and her father's constant low-grade irritation. September 8th, this year. Dad gets so mad when I ask about you. Not shouting mad, a quiet mad. He closes his eyes and sighs like I've brought up something disgusting. He says, "We've been over this, Zoe. It's not appropriate." I don't know what that means. What's not appropriate about my grandmother? Last time I asked, he said, "She has her own life and we have ours. Stop trying to mix oil and water." Are we oil and water, Grandma? That letter had arrived just 3 weeks before Marcus's visit to my kitchen. Reading it now, with the memory of his words, "Your grandkids don't even remember you," created a cold, still point in my chest. The hypocrisy was absolute. He was actively stamping out their curiosity, dismissing their inquiries as inappropriate, while boasting to me of their natural, organic forgetfulness. I wrote back to her, choosing my words with more care than ever before. "Dear Zoe, you and I are not oil and water. That is a phrase people use when they want to justify a separation. We are more like roots from the same tree, reaching through the soil in different directions but drawing from the same source. Do not argue with your father. It only gives him a reason to strengthen his position. Keep your thoughts here, with me. They are safe. And your poem about the silence in the hallway between bedrooms was excellent. You have a gift for naming quiet things." I placed that letter on the desk. It was one of the most recent. Next to it, I placed the photograph that had come with it, a selfie Zoe had taken at a science fair. Kai stood beaming next to a model of the solar system, holding a second-place ribbon. The date stamp on the photo was last month. It was contemporary evidence. It contradicted Marcus's claim of faded memory with the stark fact of a shared, current achievement. The stack of letters on my desk was not just a collection of sentimental notes. It was a dossier. It documented the sustained desire for a relationship on the part of the children. It recorded Marcus's active discouragement. It proved my consistent, stabilizing presence in their lives, despite the obstacles. It showed adaptation, resilience, and intelligent circumvention. I gathered the papers, tapping them into a neat pile. The facts were in order. The emotional progression was clear. The evidence was not merely of love, but of a deliberate, conscious choice by Zoe and Kai to maintain a connection their father had tried to sever. Their words were the weapons I would not wield in anger, but would present as the unassailable truth. The revenge was taking its final shape. It would be the simple act of making the hidden visible, of making the private record public to the one person who had denied its existence. I returned each letter to its envelope, restoring the chronological order. The box, when I filled it again, was heavier with meaning. It was no longer just my solace. It was my case file. The cedar box was returned to its drawer. The evidence was cataloged. The next phase required not action but patience. I resumed the rhythm of my days. The routine was a form of armor. On Monday, I worked in the garden. The fall air was crisp. I pulled the spent annuals, trimmed back the perennials, and turned the soil in the vegetable patch where tomatoes and peppers had grown. The work was physical and simple. Each tug of a root, each slice of the shears was a concrete task with a clear result. My mind was quiet, focused on the feel of the earth and the angle of the sun. A neighbor, Mr. Peterson, waved from his yard. "Getting it ready for winter, Ellie?" "Yes, it's about that time." "The grandkids ever help you with that?" he asked, leaning on his rake. "Not this year," I said, my tone neutral. "They're busy with school." "Ah, well, that's the way it is, all grown up before you know it." He nodded and went back to his work. I did not correct him. I did not explain. The private truth was mine to manage. On Tuesday, I went to the library where I used to work. I returned some books and browsed the new arrivals. Mrs. Allen, the current head librarian, smiled when she saw me. "Eleanor, how are you? We haven't seen Zoe and Kai in here for ages. They used to love the summer reading program." "They're older now," I said, selecting a mystery novel. "Different interests." "I suppose so. Still, it's a shame. You were always so good with them in here." Her smile was kind, tinged with a polite confusion. I offered a vague smile in return and checked out my book. The encounter was a reminder of the public narrative Marcus had crafted, a natural drifting apart. No one questioned it. Wednesday was for cleaning. I dusted the shelves, vacuumed the carpets, and washed the kitchen floor. The house was already orderly, but the act of maintaining it was a discipline. As I polished the dining table, I inspected its surface. It was smooth, wide, and unblemished. A suitable stage. On Thursday, my friend Clara called. Our conversations followed a pattern. We discussed her knee pain, the price of groceries, a new minister at her church. Then, as always, she circled to the subject. "And how are those beautiful grandbabies of yours? You seen them lately?" I held the phone to my ear and looked out the window at the oak tree. "Not recently. They're very involved with their activities." "You tell Marcus he needs to bring them by. A grandmother needs her babies." "I've mentioned it," I said, which was true. "He says their schedule is packed." Clara sighed, a sound of both sympathy and satisfaction. The sympathy was for me. The satisfaction was for the universal busyness of modern life, a topic she enjoyed. "Well, that's how it is today. No time for anything. You just take care of yourself, Ellie. Don't you sit around getting lonely." "I don't," I said, and I did not. By Friday, the quiet of the house had become a charged space. The normalcy was a veneer. I knew what I had to do next. It was not a decision born of sudden impulse. It was the next logical step in the sequence. To confront Marcus with the letters, I needed him here, on my territory, in a context that would lower his guard. I considered what that context might be. An argument would make him defensive. A plea would make him dismissive. A neutral, even welcoming gesture might provoke curiosity, or more likely, condescension. That was the emotion I could use. His sense of superiority was his weakness. I went to the kitchen and opened the recipe box. I flipped through the cards, some in my mother's hand, some in my own, until I found the one I wanted, Marcus's favorite spice cake. I had not made it in years. He had loved it as a boy, the caramel-colored cake with its cinnamon and nutmeg, the simple brown sugar frosting. It was a specific taste of his childhood. Baking it was not a gesture of surrender, it was a tactical move. It would signal a return to a familiar, non-threatening role, the mother offering comfort food. It would appeal to his nostalgia, however shallow it might now be. He would interpret it as a sign of my acquiescence, my loneliness, my desire to placate him. He would be wrong. On Saturday morning, I gathered the ingredients: flour, sugar, eggs, butter, the spices. I preheated the oven. I sifted the dry ingredients into a bowl, the fine powder creating a soft cloud. I creamed the butter and sugar, the mechanical beaters whirring in the quiet kitchen. The smell of cinnamon and nutmeg began to warm the air. I poured the batter into the greased pan and placed it in the oven. The timer ticked. I washed the mixing bowls and utensils, leaving no trace of the process behind. The cake baked, its scent deepening, spreading through the rooms. It was a scent from 30 years ago. It was the scent of a kitchen with a small, noisy boy in it, waiting for a bowl to scrape. When the cake was done, I let it cool on a wire rack. I made the frosting, cooking brown sugar and butter into a thin syrup, then beating in powdered sugar until it was spreadable. I frosted the cake evenly. It looked plain, homely, honest. I placed it under a glass dome on the counter. It was ready. The stage was set. The artifact from the past was prepared to lure him into a confrontation about the present. My hands were steady. There was no anger in the action, only a cold precision. The cake was not a peace offering. It was the first move in the final game. The house was clean. The evidence was prepared. The bait was set. All that remained was the invitation. I waited until Sunday afternoon. A Sunday call would seem casual, unplanned. The cake sat under its glass dome, a silent fact in the kitchen. I practiced the words in my mind. They needed to be warm, but not eager, neutral, but inviting. They needed to sound like a mother's ordinary gesture, not a strategist's gambit. At 3 o'clock, I dialed his number. I sat at the dining table, my back straight. The phone rang 4 times. I could picture him looking at the screen, debating whether to answer. He picked up. "Mom." His voice was distracted. I could hear the faint tapping of a keyboard in the background. "Hello, Marcus. I hope I'm not interrupting important work." "It's fine. What's up?" The keyboard tapping did not stop. "I was doing some baking yesterday," I said, my tone light and even. "I made that spice cake you used to like so much, the one with the brown sugar frosting." The tapping paused for a half second. "Oh, that's nice of you. It made me think of you. I have more than I can eat. I wondered if you might like to stop by for a piece. We could have some tea." There was a silence. I could hear him processing. The offer was outside our recent protocol. Our interactions were brief check-ins, not invitations. He would search for the angle. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice shifting to a tone of mild concern laced with suspicion. "You're not feeling unwell, are you?" "I feel perfectly fine," I said. "I just baked a cake, and I'd like to see my son. Is that so strange?" Another pause. The keyboard tap resumed, a single absent-minded click. He was multitasking, dividing his attention. That was good. It meant he wasn't giving the invitation deep scrutiny. "I'm pretty swamped," he said, the familiar excuse forming. "This quarter is—" "It doesn't have to be a long visit," I interjected smoothly, before he could build the wall completely. "Just a slice of cake, half an hour. You could take the rest home for the family." I deliberately included the family, making it seem like a generous thought. He sighed. It was the sigh of a man conceding to a minor, slightly inconvenient obligation. I could imagine his expression, the slight eye roll, the resigned set of his shoulders. He interpreted my persistence as loneliness, as the predictable neediness of an aging parent. It was the interpretation I had counted on. All right, he said, the condescension clear now. "I can probably swing by later, around 5? 5 is perfect," I said. "I'll have the tea ready." "Don't go to any trouble," he replied, the keyboard tapping becoming more rapid. He was already moving on. "Just cake is fine. See you then." The line went dead. I placed the phone back in its cradle. The conversation had lasted less than 2 minutes. It had gone exactly as projected. I cleared the table, ensuring it was completely bare except for a woven placemat at the head, where he would sit. I took 2 teacups and saucers from the cabinet, the ones with the simple blue border. I set them on the counter, ready. I prepared the tea tray with a pot, a strainer, a small jug for milk. The ritual of preparation was methodical. At 4:30, I went to my bedroom. I opened the drawer. The cedar box awaited. I did not open it. I simply looked at it. This was the final piece. I would not bring it out until the moment was right. I closed the drawer. I changed into a clean navy blue dress, something simple and presentable. I fixed my hair, tightening the silver twists at the back of my head. I examined my reflection. My face was calm. My eyes were steady. I saw a woman in her late 60s, composed, her hands at her sides. I saw the grandmother Zoe and Kai wrote to. I did not see a victim. At 5 minutes to 5, I placed the cake, still under its dome, in the center of the dining table. I put the tea tray beside it. The stage was set. The props were in place. The only thing missing was the actor who believed he was directing the scene. At exactly 5 o'clock, I heard the sound of his car in the driveway. The engine cut off. A car door opened and closed, footsteps on the front walk. He did not ring the bell. He used his key. The lock turned and the door opened. "Mom, it's me." "In the dining room, Marcus," I called back, my voice carrying a welcoming warmth that was not entirely false. It was the warmth of a curator who has finally secured the one artifact needed to complete the exhibition. He appeared in the doorway. He was still in his casual Sunday clothes, dark jeans, a gray sweater. He looked around the room, his gaze taking in the set table, the cake, the tea. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. It was a smile of confirmation. He saw a lonely old woman trying to recreate a moment from the past, trying to buy his time with childhood treats. He saw exactly what I wanted him to see. "You really did go all out," he said, walking in. He did not hug me. He pulled out the chair and sat down, his eyes already glancing toward the window, as if checking the time on some invisible clock. "It was no trouble," I said, lifting the glass dome from the cake. The rich, spicy scent bloomed between us. "It's good to see you." I cut a generous slice of the spice cake and placed it on a plate before him. I poured the tea, the stream of amber liquid steady into his cup, then mine. The ritual was precise. He picked up his fork but only pushed the cake around, breaking off a crumb from the edge. "Work is insane," he said, not looking at me. "This new merger has everyone working weekends. Sandra's no better. She's managing 3 open houses." "That sounds demanding," I said, taking my seat. I did not touch my cake either. "It is, which is why the kids' schedules have to be tight. No room for error." He took a small bite of the cake, chewed, and gave a brief nod. "It's good. Tastes like I remember." "I'm glad." I lifted my teacup, the warmth seeping into my hands. "Marcus, I've been thinking about your visit last week." He looked up, his expression guarded. "Oh?" "Yes, about what you said, about the children." I kept my voice even, conversational. He set his fork down with a soft click. "Mom, let's not do this. I didn't come here to rehash that. I came because you baked a cake." His tone was patient, as if explaining something to a slow child. "I know why you came, but I would like to understand. You stood in my kitchen and told me my grandchildren don't remember me. That was a specific statement. I want to know why you said it." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose. A show of exasperation. "I said it because it's true. It's the reality of the situation. I thought it was kinder than letting you live in a fantasy. They have their own lives. You're a part of their past, not their present. I'm sorry if that hurts, but it's fact." "How do you know it's fact?" I asked, taking a sip of tea. The flavor was mild, floral. "Because I live with them. I see them every day. They don't ask about you. They don't talk about you. When your name comes up, it's a historical reference. Grandma Ellie used to make this. That's it. They don't have a current relationship with you to remember." He picked up his fork again, but didn't use it, just held it like a tool he might need. "And why is that?" I asked, my gaze steady on his face. "Why?" He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Because relationships take work. Proximity, shared experiences. You're here, they're there. We're all busy. It's not anyone's fault. It's just geography and life." He checked his watch, a quick flick of his wrist. The gesture was deliberate, a signal that his time was limited. "You have made choices that ensure the geography remains absolute," I said, my tone still calm. "You decline visits. You screen calls. You tell them I'm tired or unwell, or that it's not a good time. You have been the gatekeeper, and you have kept the gate locked." His face tightened. The casual condescension hardened into something colder. "Are you accusing me of something? I'm protecting everyone, including you. The chaos of 2 kids would overwhelm you. You said so yourself after Dad died." "I never said that," I replied, my voice clear. "You inferred it. You decided my capacity for me, and you decided their desire for me as well." "Their desire?" He put the fork down again, more firmly. "Mom, they're kids. They desire pizza and video games. They don't sit around pining for a grandmother they barely know. That's the point. They don't know you, not in any real way. You're a birthday card signature, a face in a photo, that's all." The clock on the wall ticked in the silence. The cake sat between us, untouched except for the single fork mark in his slice. The steam from our teacups had vanished. "So, to be perfectly clear," I said, folding my hands in my lap, "you are stating as a fact based on your observation that Zoe and Kai have no active memory of me, no current connection, and no particular interest in one. Yes, he said, his jaw set. That is what I am saying. It's not malicious. It's just the truth. And you need to accept it so you can move on and enjoy your life without this hanging over you. He spoke as if he were bestowing a gift upon me, the gift of my own irrelevance. His certainty was complete. He saw my invitation, the cake, this conversation, as the last feeble protests of a woman being forced to face reality. He had no doubt. I looked at him for a long moment. I saw my son, a man who had constructed a narrative that served his need for an uncomplicated life. He had edited out the messy, enduring bonds, the quiet rebellions, the secret correspondences. He had written his version of history, and he believed it was the only version. I see, I said quietly. I pushed my chair back from the table. The legs made a soft sound on the wood floor. I stood up. His eyes followed me, a flicker of confusion in them. He expected tears, perhaps, or resigned silence. He did not expect what happened next. Thank you for clarifying your position, I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried a finality that stilled the room. It was important for me to hear you say it directly, without ambiguity. I turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving him sitting there with his cold tea and his crumbling slice of cake. I did not look back. I walked down the hallway toward my bedroom, my steps measured and sure. The time for discussion was over. The time for evidence had begun. I walked down the hallway to my bedroom. My movements were deliberate, not hurried. I heard no sound from the dining room. Marcus was likely still sitting there, wondering if I had become upset and retreated. He would be waiting for me to return, perhaps to apologize for pressing the issue, or to change the subject to something safer. I entered my room. The late afternoon light slanted across the bed. I went directly to the dresser. I opened the top drawer. The cedar box sat where I had left it. I did not pause for reflection. I lifted it out. It was not heavy, but its weight in my hands felt significant, dense with meaning. I closed the drawer. I turned and walked back down the hallway. My steps were firm on the hardwood floor. As I passed the living room archway, I saw the wall of photographs from the corner of my eye. The faces of my family, past and present, were silent witnesses. I entered the dining room. Marcus was still seated. He had not touched his tea or his cake. He looked up as I approached, his expression one of mild impatience about to tip into irritation. Then his eyes dropped to the box in my hands. His brow furrowed slightly. He did not understand what it was. I did not sit down. I walked to the table, to the space between his plate and mine. I placed the cedar box on the wooden surface. It made a solid, definitive sound, a thud that seemed to absorb all other noise in the room. He stared at the box, then at my face. "What's that?" I did not answer him immediately. I untied the velvet ribbon that was wound around my wrist, the one I had taken from the drawer. I laid it aside. Then I opened the lid of the box. The scent of cedar rose between us, sharp and clean. I reached in and lifted out the stacked bundle of envelopes and photographs, all neatly ordered and secured with their own ribbon. I placed the entire stack on the table beside the empty box. It was a substantial pile, perhaps 3 inches high. The edges of the envelopes were softened from handling. The colors of the children's stationery, pinks, blues, yellows, were visible. Several recent photographs were on top, facing up. Marcus's eyes were fixed on the pile. His confusion was complete. "What is all that?" "Proof," I said, my voice flat and clear. I reached out and untied the ribbon around the letters. It loosened and fell away. I then did something simple. I spread the top layer of envelopes and photographs slightly, fanning them so the handwriting on the envelopes and the images in the photos were unmistakable. I looked at my son. His face had begun to change. The impatience was draining away, replaced by a slow, dawning apprehension. He recognized his daughter's looping cursive on a lavender envelope. He saw a recent photo of his son, one he himself had probably taken, now in a stack on his mother's table. "They remember me, Marcus," I said. The words were not spoken in triumph. They were a statement of fact, delivered with the calm certainty of a librarian citing a source. He did not move. He stared at the pile as if it were a foreign object, something that had no logical place in this reality. His hand, which had been resting on the table, twitched slightly. What is this?" he asked again, his voice lower now. "These are letters," I said, "and photographs. From your children, to me, spanning the last 3 years. The most recent arrived last month." I tapped the top photograph, Kai at the science fair. The date stamp was clearly visible. His eyes flicked from the photograph to my face, then back to the stack. The color was leaving his cheeks. His arrogance, his absolute certainty was a shell around him, and I had just placed before him the instrument of its fracture. "That's not possible," he whispered. But it was not a challenge directed at me. It was a statement of disbelief directed at the evidence. "It is not only possible, it is documented," I replied. I pulled an envelope from the middle of the stack. It was one of Zoe's early ones. I slid out the letter and placed it on the table, facing him. Her careful 11-year-old handwriting filled the page. "Dear Grandma, I got your card. Dad didn't see it. I keep it in my drawer." He looked at the words but did not seem to read them. His brain was refusing to process the information. This was the hidden current that had been flowing beneath the placid surface of his managed life, and he had been completely unaware. "They wrote to you," he said, the words hollow. "They wrote to me," I confirmed. "They asked questions. They shared their lives. They sent pictures of their achievements. They told me their worries. They remembered me every single time." I let the silence hang. The clock ticked. The untouched cake sat between us, forgotten. The entire purpose of his visit, the condescending act of humoring his lonely mother, had evaporated. He was no longer the benefactor bestowing his precious time. He was the defendant confronted with exhibits A through Z. He finally moved. His hand reached out slowly, hesitantly, towards the stack. His fingers hovered over the science fair photo. He did not pick it up. He simply touched the edge of it, as if verifying its physical reality. The revelation was not complete. He had seen the existence of the correspondence, but he had not yet absorbed its content. He had not yet read the words that detailed his own role in their secrecy. That was the next step. The unraveling was about to begin. His fingers closed around the edge of the science fair photograph. He lifted it, holding it closer to his face. He examined it as if it were a forgery, searching for some flaw that would prove it was not what it seemed. His eyes scanned the image. Kai's proud smile, the ribbon, the model planets. The date stamp was in the corner, digital and precise. "Last month." "This is from our kitchen," he said, his voice quiet, confused. "I took this picture." "You did," I said, "and Kai mailed it to me. He wanted me to see." Marcus set the photo down slowly next to his plate. His gaze shifted to the stack of envelopes. He reached for the one on top, the lavender one with Zoe's handwriting. His hands were not steady. He pulled out the folded pages. The letter was 2 sheets, front and back, filled with her tight sloping script. He began to read. I watched his face. I saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. His eyes, which had been scanning quickly, suddenly stopped. They fixed on a line. He blinked. He read it again. The color that had left his cheeks earlier now returned in 2 faint, sharp spots high on his cheekbones. He did not speak. He flipped the page, read a few more lines, then stopped again. His breathing had become shallow. "What does it say, Marcus?" I asked, though I knew exactly what it said. He did not answer. He simply turned the first page around and slid it across the table toward me, his finger jabbing at a specific paragraph. His hand was trembling. I did not need to read it. I knew the words by heart. but I looked down, following the line of his trembling finger. Dad gets so mad when I ask about you. Not shouting mad, a quiet mad. He closes his eyes and sighs like I've brought up something disgusting. He says, "We've been over this, Zoe. It's not appropriate." I looked back at him. She was trying to understand what was not appropriate about her grandmother. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked from the letter to my face, his expression one of sheer, uncomprehending shock. The words he had spoken in this very room, "Your grandkids don't even remember you," collided with the words on the page in front of him. The contradiction was absolute. He dropped Zoe's letter as if it had burned him. He grabbed another envelope at random. It was one of Kai's from last year. He tore it open, his movements frantic now. He scanned the printed words. "I asked Dad last Sunday if we could visit you. He said it was too much. I asked too much for who. He said for everyone." A low sound escaped Marcus's throat, something between a gasp and a groan. He put the letter down and pressed the heels of his hands against his closed eyes. He sat like that for a long moment, his shoulders hunched. I said nothing. I let the evidence work. He lowered his hands. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked at the pile, this time not with confusion, but with a dawning, horrified comprehension. He was no longer just seeing letters. He was seeing a pattern of systematic exclusion and the children's conscious, deliberate effort to circumvent it. "How?" he started, his voice rough. "How did they mail these? When?" "Zoe's first note was hidden in a birthday card you sent," I said, my tone factual. "After that, they found ways. School mailboxes, a post office near their school. They are resourceful children. And you wrote back." It wasn't a question. Every time. For 3 years. He flinched as if struck. The duration, the consistency was another blow. This was not a fleeting, childish whim. It was a sustained, secret relationship. He picked up another of Zoe's letters, a more recent one. He read silently, his face growing paler with each line. This one contained her poetry, her private thoughts about anxiety at school, things she had not shared with him or Sandra. His daughter had a rich inner life, and she had chosen to trust it to me. The final, devastating piece of the revelation was not just that they remembered me, but that they needed me. I was their confidant. His arrogance lay in shards around him. He had been so sure of his control, so sure of his narrative. He had seen himself as the pragmatic protector, shielding his children from irrelevance and his mother from burden. Now he saw the truth. He had been the obstacle. He had been the one they needed protection from. The disgust in his sigh, the dismissal in his phrase, "not appropriate." These were the things they had hidden from. He let the letter fall from his fingers. It fluttered to the table. He looked at me, and for the first time in many years, I saw my son not as a successful, dismissive man, but as a person who was utterly, profoundly lost. The foundation of his worldview had been pulled out from under him. "They lied to me," he whispered, the realization hollow and awful. "They survived you," I corrected him, my voice still calm. "There is a difference. They created a space for a love you told them was not important. They are not deceitful. They are loyal." He had no rebuttal. He stared at the scattered pages, the photos, the envelopes. The physical proof of his failure was too vast to deny. The revenge was complete. It was not in my words, but in his own children's handwriting. He had been undone not by my anger, but by their enduring love. The silence that followed was thicker than any that had come before, heavy with the weight of a shattered illusion. He did not speak again. He sat for several minutes, his eyes moving over the scattered papers on the table as if trying to memorize their arrangement, to fix this moment in his mind. Then slowly he pushed his chair back. The sound was loud in the quiet room. He stood up. He did not look at me. He looked at the letters at the photograph of his son, at the evidence of his own blindness. "I have to go," he said, his voice thick and unfamiliar. I nodded. "All right." He turned and walked out of the dining room. I heard his footsteps in the hallway, the sound of the front door opening and closing. It shut with a soft final click, not a slam. There was no anger left in him for slamming doors. The engine of his car started, then faded down the street. I remained seated. I listened to the silence reclaim the house. It was a different silence now. The tension that had lived in the walls since his last visit was gone. It had been released, not with a shout, but with the rustle of paper and the slow draining of color from a man's face. After a time, I stood. I began to clear the table. I took his plate, the single fork mark in the cake now dry and crumbling. I scraped it into the trash. I took my own untouched slice and did the same. The cake had served its purpose. I washed the plates, the forks, the teacups. I dried them and put them away. I wiped the table clean of crumbs and the ghost of the confrontation. I returned to the dining room. The letters and photographs still lay where they had been left. I gathered them carefully, handling each page with the same respect I always had. I did not reread them. I simply put them back in order, the oldest at the bottom, the most recent on top. I retied the ribbon around them. I placed the bundle back inside the cedar box. The scent seemed softer now, less urgent. I carried the box back to my bedroom. I opened the drawer and placed it inside. I closed the drawer. It was not a triumphant act. It was an act of restoration. The evidence was returned to its archive. Its work was done. I walked to the living room window. Outside, the old oak tree stood in my front yard. Its leaves were turning, edges tinged with gold and rust. Its branches were thick and solid, some of them lower now than they used to be. Its roots were visible above the soil, gnarled and strong, gripping the earth. It had been there before this house was built. It had weathered storms, drought, and the careless scrape of a bulldozer when the development went in. It endured. It was not aggressive. It simply was. It provided shade, a home for birds, a point of navigation for children who drew it from memory. I saw myself in that tree, not as a metaphor, but as a fact. I was a fixed point. I had deep roots. I provided shelter. I endured. Marcus had seen me as something decorative, perhaps, or something past its prime, ready to be cleared away to make a neater landscape. He'd been wrong. The phone would ring soon, not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but soon. It would be Zoe, her voice tentative, asking if her dad had visited, if everything was all right. Or it would be Kai, wanting to tell me about a new project. The dynamic had shifted. The gatekeeper was disarmed. The path, while not yet clear, was no longer actively blocked. My revenge was complete. It had not required shouting or legal threats or grand gestures. It had required patience, preservation, and the simple devastating act of revealing a truth that had been deliberately hidden. I had reclaimed my narrative. I had forced him to see me not as a fading photo, but as a living, central figure in the story of his own children's lives. I had exchanged his pity for his shock and his condescension for a humbled, painful awareness. I turned from the window. The house was clean. The light was fading. My hands were steady. I felt a quiet fatigue, but it was the fatigue after a long task is finished, not the exhaustion of defeat. I had protected the connection. I had honored the trust of 2 children. I had corrected a lie. I went to my chair in the living room and sat down. I did not turn on the lamp. I sat in the gathering dusk in the quiet house with its deep roots and its orderly drawers. I waited, not with anxiety, but with certainty. The silence was no longer an absence. It was a space waiting to be filled with the sound of their voices.